Well, we are talking about the Way of Folly today. Good morning and greetings to you from Our Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Ryan Dribble. We're talking about the Psalms, and we're talking about the Way of Folly. We're talking about the Proverbs today. And the Proverbs, along with chapter 1, verse 7, which is kind of the key to unwrapping the Proverbs, which I'll just read again, just so we can be clear. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So this is the key. The translational or metaphorical key to unlock all the Proverbs. They're not written. I remember as a kid, my parents had a little cartoon book that would show proverbs and parables in like little cartoons, and you're supposed to learn things from them as a kid. But the book was entirely set forth to teach kids possibly ethics, a way to interpret life, but not essentially Christian, or in this case, essentially Jewish. The Proverbs are written for everyone, but they only give their deepest value, let's say, to Jewish people who understand that the Lord, Yahweh, is their God. So this is kind of the key to unlocking the Proverbs. And then one of the other things that the Proverbs does is they contrast wisdom versus folly. Wisdom would be having a fear and knowledge of the Lord, and then from that fear and knowledge of the Lord, learning various ethics, morals, philosophies about life. Everything that King Solomon would have taught falls into place here. Folly would be the opposite. Folly would be living a fleshly life. Folly would be living a worldly life. Folly would be being united to the pagan idols and the worldly idolatry pursuits. So we can not necessarily worship things in the world, but we can almost treat them like idols, i.e., money, government, people who have power that say they will protect us, like kings and things like this. There's lots of ways to practice idolatry. So the way of folly is almost in every single way the opposite of wisdom. Wisdom is withheld. Wisdom is usually quiet. Wisdom is people who are wise usually think and meditate on God's truths, and so use them. One of the Proverbs we read not too long ago was the idea that a wise person kind of refrains from speaking too quickly, but a foolish person is constantly speaking without thinking, and they're the loudest people in the room. They're belligerent at times, whereas a wise person is often meek, humble, quiet, these kinds of things. So we're contrasting these, and then wisdom and folly almost take on real life personal characteristics. Folly is often described, as personified. We already went through this before in chapter, what is this? Chapter, I think, 7? Yeah, the adulteress. So folly is compared to an adulteress, or, in this context, an adulteress would have been someone who was married to someone else, but committing adultery. There's also times where folly is compared to a prostitute or a harlot, whereas wisdom is a good woman who is calling you to good things. It is a little confusing because Christ is referred to in the New Testament as the bridegroom of the church, and the church is its bride. So then wisdom being kind of discerned as a female in this context is a little confusing, because then we understand that Jesus Christ is the embodiment of all wisdom, right? But maybe at the root of the discussion is that Christ has a special God, wisdom, has a special relationship with his people, i.e., the congregation in the Old Testament, the church in the New Testament, the ecclesia, these kinds of things. They're very intimately connected. And wisdom is the woman we should choose, or the maybe the spouse we should choose. But folly is the one that maybe is more attractive and offers more pleasure, right? So today we are on chapter 9, verses 13 through 18, and we are going to get a description of the way of folly. Okay, and so this kind of will close up this discussion. And then what's going to happen is, um, I think with these first 9 chapters, then the Proverbs have laid out a very clear way of understanding how to interpret the Proverbs, and perhaps what you should be looking for in them, right? The Proverbs are not necessarily there to grant you financial opportunity or riches or even power through wisdom, right? But they are to grant you the ability to see your Lord, the ability to listen to Him, the ability, So in other words, the treasures are definitely not earthly treasures. The treasures, the treasures are heavenly treasures. The treasures are treasures that God gives. So we're going to talk about this, the way of folly, as opposed to the way of wisdom. Chapter 9 of Proverbs, verses 13 through 18. And we'll begin there. Eset keselut homia petayut ubal yeda'a ma. Okay, so eset, we have ishet. So that should be, I'm sorry, that should be a soft S. I pronounced that wrong. Ishet. The Hebrew word for woman is ish. So in the Garden of Eden in Genesis, we get ish for Adam, isha for woman, and here we have ishet, which is just a derivation telling us person and gender of the word. Okay, so a woman, a foolish one, right, is clamorous. Clamorous. Let's look up this word. So foolish, we've already had before. Kesil uth, and it is here's some definitions: stupidity. Okay. Wow. Here's an interesting little tidbit. The only occurrence in the entire Bible of this word is this verse. That's kind of unusual, especially when it comes into like an adjective or a word that's a common use of speech, right? So Kesil uth, a woman of addition is stupidity. Now there's a connection to the word kasal. Let's take a look at that. See what we have here. Kasal is to be or to become stupid. Original meaning possibly thick, plump, fat, in a good sense. Loins, confidence, in a bad sense. Stupidity, folly, stupid fellow. In Arab, we have an idea of to become sluggish. So maybe with this idea of becoming flat, becoming plump or fat, perhaps the idea is like someone, it probably becomes a word. It starts off, maybe I'm thinking of like the word etymology, how the word starts to gain additional meanings, right? So maybe in the beginning, it was a word that just described how a chicken or an animal becomes fattened, which is, on a farm, it's a good thing, right? You're excited about that because that's good for the family. But as a animal becomes bigger or plumper, it also has this definition of sluggish, right? And we can get a sense of that. Like when an animal gets fat, overweight, too big, they become sluggish, and then the sluggishness leads to maybe a very rudimentary idea of stupidity or being slow, or I mean sluggish is a good idea here, right? Seems to be the connection. It's a very, very interesting word. Doesn't get used a lot. There's only one occurrence of kasal too. Wow. In Jeremiah 10:8. And the definition here that most of the translations are giving is foolish. Okay. So you can kind of see how that word comes to be. So we have this a woman, who is maybe she's at home but not working. She's at home and being lazy. Or we would just take away the home part. So this woman, this described woman, right? She's lazy. She's sluggish. She's maybe, um, uh, she's become kind of fat, and not necessarily like I don't want to critique that aspect, but just like this idea of doing very little, becoming very lazy, and becoming very sluggish. So she's become this foolish, right? And so a woman, a foolish one, is um, yeah. So the woman, now the ESV translates it the woman of folly. So this foolishness they take as like a proper name. So the foolish woman, and they don't mean it as an adjective, but they mean like literally. There's one woman of folly. It's this one, right? But let's dive into the clamorous here, or this word here. So the word is from the root hama, which is to murmur, to growl, to roar, be boisterous. Okay, let's take a look at this etymology here. Uh, it seems like there's a connection to growling like a dog. And then there's also a definition of like the roaring of waves. And then we have another definition here. This is from the Brown Driver Breaks, which is a very common Hebrew um, uh, lexicon. And a lexicon would be you get a Hebrew word and you get the English meanings in your language. So you could get like a lexicon that would actually translate the Hebrew into German or Hebrew into French, however. Right? Brown Driver Briggs is one that translates the Hebrew into English. So you have roar of waves, be in commotion, stir of city, boisterous, turbulent, as with wine. So the thing I get from this is so like the growling of a dog, um, and then we have kind of roaring of waves, and then the commotion of city. It seems like, and then this idea of being boisterous with wine, right? Like needless noise. So I live in I have a family. I have 6 kids, and at times, like they're just making noise to make noise. It seems like there's really no even rhyme or purpose to it. They're just making noise in the background, and it can become very over. Like there's this background. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but we live in a culture that is awash in background noise. Like in fact, we're almost get uncomfortable when things are quiet. But that background noise is kind of all. Could it be? Uh, it's an interesting thought. It just occurred to me. We have high rates of anxiety and high rates of well, let's just stick to anxiety. High rates of anxiety, stress, and we also have high rates of background noise in almost every aspect of our life. Whether it's literally the TV running and there's a TV show running in the background, we're streaming, or we're running like a show just episode after it. We're binging, right? And so it's on in the background, or we're watching it, or there's music on the background, or we've got a book on tape. Like we can never have silence and just a moment. And I think there are moments where we find meditation and peace with God while we're singing and we're praising. Those are great moments. But I think there's also the flip side of that is, and we see it in the scriptures, right? Where God comes in a still small voice, He comes in the quiet times as well. He wakes Samuel from sleep, and he how do these things happen? If Samuel has a book on tape on in the background and it's fairly loud, is God? I mean, of course, God's going to get through. But you get what I'm saying? It's like we fill our lives with so much noise that it gets hard. I think it's almost imperceptible in terms of we wouldn't really be able to describe it or actively think about it. But I think what it does is it's kind of building up in the subconscious. It's building up in the background. It's building up in our person. It's building up in our bodies. This level of stress that now my wife always makes fun of me because I'm a music person and I feel like I have pretty sensitive ears to background noise. Like I can't really do background noise. If there's music on in the background, I'm listening to it, and I have a hard time of like dismissing it, and then you put music on to study, and then you focus on what you're doing, and the music doesn't help me in that respect. It actually distracts me from studying. I have to have almost complete quietness. Um, I wonder if that constant noise, and we become a more urban culture. We are dealing with group settings more often, large groups of people, or we're in the mall or other places where there's always noise. I think it builds. It builds in the back of our head, in our body, in our personhood, and it just starts to stress us out. And there's something very wonderful about the quiet. So what do? We seek out the quiet. We seek out the quiet in terms of camping, getting away, vacations. We're looking for that thing that we've lost, and we can't really put our finger on it, right? Well, the woman of seductory, right? She is loud like this meaningless noise in the background, right? Like a dog barking, like waves breaking. It's there's no usefulness to the noise. It's just kind of background noise, but it's loud enough to be distracting, right? Well, I should say it's loud enough not to be background noise. Let's put it that way. But she just doesn't have a lot to say. She doesn't have a lot of worthwhile things to listen to because it seems like it's just meaningless noise. Yeah. So, ooh, interesting stuff. She is a woman who has just kind of a loud, boisterous, but meaningless voice. And I think that says a lot. There's nothing more than I think nothing more frustrating than being around someone who always feels a need to be heard, but they don't have a lot to say. Anyway, going on to verse 13. She is seductive and knows nothing. Okay. So we have so let's take a look at this word petayut, and that must be where they're getting seductive from. Simplicity, naive, simple. Yeah, I'm not sure where they're getting this idea of seductive. She's seductive. Let's take a look. Yeah. So the Hebrew here, the ESV translation on letter 3, I'm sorry, has another possible translation here, or full of simpleness. I think that's probably more accurate. My guess is that um, this is a textual issue in terms of that. I'm going to get out my Hebrew Bible. I want to check this because I'm guessing that there's a variance here. Okay. And what we have is that as the Hebrew text is, it's an interesting little side note. We'll take a little side gander for a while and talk about this just because it's an interesting concept. So as the Hebrew Bible is copied year after year, century after century, there were variances in the text. Now that shouldn't give you pause because overall the scriptures are incredibly consistent. Okay, but they do have some differences in them. And that should, like I said, shouldn't throw us for a loop. Usually they're very minor. And what'll happen is, since Hebrew is a 3-letter root language, so all the words are at their root, they have 3 letters. Sometimes you can have words that are very close, like maybe there's between this word and this word, there's like 1 letter difference, or they kind of almost sound the same, but they're spelled a little differently, and there's some mistake in translation, and so you get a different kind of word. Now, what I want to check is, this is 9 verse 13. Let's see if we have a textual variant, and we do. Um, so yeah, okay. So here I have the shavat. Oh wait, no, hold on. I might be in the wrong chapter here. Yeah, I'm in the wrong chapter. Sorry. Yes, we have same word that I have in my computer translation, but then we get to there's a little tack on, and it has a little letter B, and we go into. I'm going to show you here real quick. So here's the text, and then here's what we call the apparatus. And in the apparatus, we would get any kind of textual notes that there might be a different translation. And I want to show you how this works. It's kind of interesting. So we have 9:13. This is our word right here. I'm going to put it real close to the camera. That's, if I can get to focus here. Come on, focus. Okay, I mean, it's focusing on me. Maybe I can get to focus on the text. There it is. See this word right here in front of my finger? And then see that little guy right there? That little letter? That's telling us that in the apparatus down here, there's an additional thing here we need to look at. Okay. Now bear with me. It's been a while since I've used the apparatus. So 13, yeah. Okay. So this is where we're getting our different translation. And I'm guessing what the ESV did is, I can't remember my apparatus very well, but what it's saying is that there are other manuscripts. So our main Hebrew text, which is the majority of our Hebrew translation, is based on the Masoretic text. The Masoretes were a group of Jews who had created a text of the Old Testament that they had put in a codex or a book form, and it's very complete, and it was a very good copy. Now, I believe the Masoretic text, if I'm not mistaken, was found around like 300 AD, or that could be the Alexandria text. But nevertheless, the Masoretic text is very consistent and is very I can't think of the right word, trustworthy in the sense that the text is very accurate. Okay. But what our modern Hebrew Bibles will do is they will actually tell us that there are other texts besides the Masoretic text that have a different translation, or they literally have a different word here in this spot than the Masoretic, and they're very close. They're like 1-letter difference, but the word for that's offered up here, now it says FRT. I can't remember what text that is, but there's another text that they would say like, hey, we've surveyed all of the texts, and there's a couple of texts that say this word instead of that word. Now, the majority of them will agree with the Masoretic, but occasionally you have some weird ones. Like the Sumerians had their own text, and so we sometimes pull from that, as well as other groups. So this is where we get this idea of, in the ESV, that she is seductive and knows nothing. Well, that makes sense considering what we've already learned about the woman of the adulteress back in chapter 7, right? I don't think we need to dive too deep in this, because it still ends with who doesn't know, right? Now, if you put her as a seductress and who doesn't know anything, it gives you about the same thing. There's a little bit of nuance there that she's, maybe actively trying to seduce people. But I think probably the translation, the word used in the actual Masoretic text and in my electronic copy here, probably makes more sense, because in the context of that little section, it makes more sense, right? Literally saying, if she's simple, then she doesn't know a lot. Well, yeah, that makes sense, right? That logically, those things go together. The seductiveness kind of comes out of left field, where we haven't really gotten there yet. We've just gotten she's foolish, she's loud, and then we know from the end of the text there's no issue there that she doesn't know a lot. Well, then her being simple makes a little more sense, right? So let's decide today. Let's at least agree today in our purposes. We're going to say that simple makes more sense, right? So she is simple. This, and by the way, the ESV having seductress and then the text having simple. This is why you study language, right? So you can actually go to these things and not just trust the New King James. This is why you know languages and why you train your pastors to do this kind of stuff. Okay. So she is simple and not knows what. So she is simple and knows, and knows and doesn't know. I think what could be maybe where they're getting anything. So she is simple and doesn't know anything, right? And knows not anything. Either way it works. It's interesting. Verse 14. Basa Yave lepata beta al kise merome karet. So Veyasaba is vav is a kind of a conjunction, right? So here we get we could say and she sits or for she sits, right? And then shaba is to sit, right? So she sits at the door of her house. Very simple stuff. Bait. Beta, bait is house, so her house. The ta is the pronoun, so she's at the door of her house, right? And then lepata, I think it's pate is the word for door, but I'm not 100% sure. No, petach. Sorry, petach is the word for door. So interesting too. Here's a fun one because petach is used in Star Trek. I'm such a nerd now. Petach is used in Star Trek as a curse word in Klingon. I don't know if they're spelled the same. I doubt it, but it's the exact sound that I'm really showing my nerd colors here. But yeah, it is the same sound that Klingons use for patach, and it's kind of a insult, right? So I don't know why a door is insulting in Klingon, but whatever. Okay, uh, that's super nerd. Okay, so if she sits at the door of her house, right? And then later we have all kiseh on a seat by the highest places of the city. So let's take a look at that highest places word just for a second. The height. Marum, and room is to be, it's a verb, to be higher or to be exalted. Actually, I've seen this word, but yeah, here's where I've seen it before. I think I remember seeing it in Exodus when they're, lifted up his staff. There was one place I've seen it, remember when we were translating about the ark, they lifted it up, and I think they used this word room. Okay, so it's just an idea. Room is also nope. You learned some Klingon today. I could even I was even thinking here for a second that the derivation of room here, maroom, in the same episode they talk about of Star Trek. They talk about a Romulan curse word, and it sounds like maroon. I'm just such a nerd. Wow. Okay. Anyway, so this is a cool word. It is to lift something up, and then very often what it happens is this room word gets caught up in like worship. So when we raise up like idols, we raise them up and put them up high, and then of course you can understand when we're raising up idols in the high places in the land, well, then this is seen as very negative things. In Israel, God's very often telling the people to stay away from the high places because that's where idol worship happens. They would put idols up on top of the hills so that people could see them from miles away and they would go towards them, right? And God said, no, 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 stay away from those places because bad stuff happens there, right? So I wonder, that's why my interest was piqued here. If this has to do with that, is, you know, the harlot, the seductress, she sits in the high places of the city, right? Because look at verse 15. Lekro leobere darek hayasarim orahotam, right? To call, kara. We have the la in front of it, which is a preposition, to, and then the verb after it, kara, which is to call, right? To those who are passing by. Derek is the way, right? So those who are, I think this word has to do with like, yeah. So Derek is the way, and then it's saying to the ones who are walking on the way, to the ones who are walking. Avar is to walk or to pass by. So she's calling out as the ones who are walking by on the path, right? Who go straight on their way, right? So she is a, what is the woman of folly is a boisterous, is a simple woman. She is, we use the word clamorous wasn't the word we used a different word, which was and I think the ESV put, what did the ESV say again? ESV said she is loud, right? Well, that's not as descriptive as what I'm hoping for. But she is boorish, maybe we might say, right? She just kind of, she talks loudly. She doesn't have anything really to say, but she's very much trying to call out the people who are walking in the way to come to her, right? She doesn't have much to offer. You know, and not to dive too deep and to get kind of gross or anything, but I think you see a lot of this in the problem of pornography, right? The women who are usually like involved in that, they're boorish and they're calling out in low, ugly ways, right? Because I think men are looking for low, ugly things, and they're going to go to someone who is demonstrating the values and the things of the thing that they want. So like, it's a very low concern. It's a fleshly desire, and they're looking for people who kind of who demonstrate that very fleshly desire they're looking for, right? They're loud and they're boorish and they're simple, right? To call people who go straight on their way. Going on, then that's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot there in verse 15. It's pretty simple. I kind of want to. I think that the thing I'm wondering in verse 14, if there was a purposeful connection to the idea of the high places in Scripture. I don't know, because it's in the city. Usually, the high places are described as places out in the rural places, out in the wilderness, right? Not necessarily in the city, but I think it works. I think it's the same, because it's trying to do the same thing, to be very visible, to attract people to it. So otherwise, I think verse 14 and 15 are pretty straightforward. Okay, and then we have 16. This is what she's saying. Right. So after on their way, we get a semicolon in the Hebrew. I think that is to mark off, like, this is her quote. This is what she's going to say. Who is simple? Let him turn in here. And as for him lacking understanding, and she says to him, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant, but not he does know that The dead are there. In the depths of hell, her guests are. So she says, whoever is simple, let him turn in here. I think we need to take a look at this simple again. I think that really is going to help us understand the verse. Whoever is simple, whoever is open-minded. That is such a stupid word that's thrown around so much. Like this idea that, see, what I think what open-minded is supposed to mean is being open to the truth, right? But what open-minded has been made to be in our culture is being open to every stupid idea that's out there. And to be frank, a guy who is a former teacher, there are bad questions, there are stupid ideas, there are stupid thoughts, right? I mean, like, there are foolish things. Um, it's a hard thing as a pastor. I think sometimes I think it's hard for other groups, to a pastor as well. Sometimes a pastor will come up with I mean, like recently I came up with an idea. And it was just a shot in the dark. It's just sometimes I have a creative idea, so I say, yeah, I'll throw it out there, I'll throw it to the wall and see if it sticks. And a lot of people were unwilling just to be honest and just say, this isn't a good idea, Pastor. They should be. I'm a guy just like anybody else. If I have a bad idea, tell me it's a bad idea. I'll move on. I'll think of something else. But we have this strange thing now in our culture where if someone has any impetus behind something, if they have enthusiasm, right, we can't tell them that this isn't a good idea. What I did is I had offered to the school to do a Psalms Bible study. My Psalm study on Thursday. I was just saying, I could go over to the school and tape it over there and offer it to the school teachers. I don't usually have. I was having people come to the congregation to see it in person, but I haven't had any lately. So I thought, well, I'll just go over to the school and I'll do it there, and maybe I'll have some kids, or maybe I'll have some high schoolers, or maybe I'll have some teachers come and stay for part of it or all of it or whatever. It's fine. But I sent it off to them, and they're like, it's kind of a busy day, and there's not a lot of extra time, and the teachers don't have extra time, and I didn't know any of that, right? So I'm making up a plan, not knowing any of the pertinent facts, and at the end of the day, here's the truth: it was a bad idea. It wasn't a good idea. There's isn't time for it to happen. And they should have said, we thank you for your enthusiasm. This isn't going to work, but we appreciate you thinking of us. And then I would have been like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. We'll think of something else. But God bless them. They're so very much trying to appreciate my effort, and like they don't want to squelch my enthusiasm. That they're kind of like entertaining something that probably shouldn't be entertained. It's not that big of a deal. Just let it go, right? I think this happens a lot. Like I'll think of ideas, and everyone who is nice to me and kind to me, they don't have the willingness to tell me, hey, this is a bad idea, Pastor. Let's do something else. And vice versa. It happens to me as well. People come and they're excited about something, and they think this is great. And I'm like, I'm not willing to be like, there is such a thing as stewardship of our time and our talents and our abilities. Perhaps this isn't the best use of our time and our abilities and the limited time we have in the world. Let's focus on something else, right? So open-minded drives me crazy, right? Because usually this is thrown at Christians, saying you're not open-minded, right? And the reality is, hey, I've got a set of beliefs that have been given to me because my church body, Christianity, has passed down a belief that Jesus Christ rose from the dead and he was the Son of God. And if he's the Son of God and he rose from the dead, which he did, then that has a claim on my life, right? If this guy is who he says he is, then everything he says has meaning. And I can't just dismiss them as much as I might like to. If Christ tells me that there are issues with that divorce is not a good idea, then I have to kind of take him seriously because he's also the author of my life and the author of my salvation. If Christ tells me things about God, or here's one that drives me nuts. Everyone wants to kind of say that all roads lead to heaven, and they want to put Christ in that ballpark and say, well, Christ said all roads lead to heaven. You just got to be a good person. Actually, no, Christ said this: I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And then he goes on to describe what that actually is about, what it means to go through Christ. It means to go through his death and resurrection. In other words, when Christ dies, he gives us his covering of his blood, of his sacrifice. In other words, he dies to pay for the sins that we should have paid. We are covered with his righteousness. That is how we inherit eternal life. And we hold on to this thing through faith. The Holy Spirit gives us faith to trust in this thing that God has already done. That is how someone gets to heaven. That is it. It's only that way. It isn't by doing good works. It isn't by being a good person. It is by trusting in Jesus Christ alone. And Christ makes that claim himself. How can I believe that Christ died and rose for me, that he gave me eternal life, that he forgave my sins, but then not believe that he's the only road to heaven when he said it himself? It doesn't make any sense. Or if I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, like just that much, if I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, then how can I not take every word that he says seriously, including, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I mean, if you're, it's ridiculous. That's not being open-minded at that point. Do you understand? Like, open-minded would be considering all the facts and considering the truth. Completely denying what Christ actually says about himself is not being open-minded. That's just lying. It's just absolutely being foolish. Like, you're not even willing to consider the facts that are obvious in the case. That Christ said this, he meant it, it matters. Now, if you want to have a debate about whether Christ is the Son of God, let's do that. That probably is a better use of our time. But to disagree about what Christ actually said in his scriptures, I don't know how that's helpful, right? So this idea of being open-minded, I think that if you're open-minded, if the beginning of wisdom is a fear and knowledge of the Lord, then being open-minded can only be to contradict that fact, because it's everything, right? The beginning of knowledge is the fear and love of the fear and knowledge of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. In other words, if I know the book of Exodus and the Ten Commandments and the teaching of the Pentateuch, right? This is a system that's set in place that is very demanding of its adherence. In other words, not demanding in terms of like punishment, but just it has a very clear set of rules, a very clear set of understandings. Once you kind of you are this person in this set of rules, there's not a lot else you can do. You can't step outside of it because it's very clearly consistent across the board. I don't know if I'm communicating this very well. What I'm trying to say is that once you're one of God's children and you listen to his word, he's the definition of everything. You see, he helps us define our life. He helps us understand creation, understand our life, understand the afterlife, understand the cosmos, everything. The only way to be open-minded is to basically negate that and say it's something other than God. How can we do that? In good conscience, how can we do that? We can't. So, yeah. I think this is like not, it has a much different meaning than it means, than we have given it. Open-minded is this kind of, very, it's looked at as a very good thing. Oh, you really think about things. You're very, and I don't, even in our modern context, I don't know how helpful it is to consistently look at every theological system or every philosophical system and accept it with the same amount of weight and bearing as the ones that really matter. I don't know how, as a Christian person, and then saying, well, I'm going to be open-minded. I don't know how helpful that is to you. Because if you're going to be open-minded to the teaching of Hinduism, that's not going to take you towards God. It's going to take you away from God. Maybe you could be open-minded as far as you can admit that Hinduism is a pagan religion and that they're worshiping a false god. And then maybe you could understand the historical concepts of it. and you could even maybe study how the religion works. But I think if you start entertaining some kind of idea that there is spiritual or eternal value in the teachings, that's not being open-minded. That's being lied to. That's being ushered into idolatry. And again, if you actually accept what God says about himself, idolatry is not the way you want to go. You don't want to turn away from God. You want to turn towards him. So yeah, I don't think this is a good. Open-minded is kind of a terrible translation, to be honest with you. Oh, and look at how the ESV translated. To whoever is simple, let him turn in here, and to him who lacks sense. I think that's a great trait. Yeah, him who lacks sense, right? Open-minded, maybe open-minded in the sense of you don't have any determining philosophies to actually judge information. So in other words, a fear and love of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So you don't have that initial training, catechesis, for lack of a better word, that so that you can now see the world and judge it and have common sense toward what's, because you have nothing to judge with. You have nothing to use as your tools to kind of judge different things in the world, right? So lack of sense makes actually I think a great translation, right? And to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water. Let's finish this up. Stolen water is sweet. So mayim is a very, very simple simple word for water. Okay, so there's nothing there that's terribly helpful. Let's look at stolen. This is just a participle of to steal. Yeah, carries away, deceive, kidnaps, stealing. So stolen water is pretty, I think, pretty accurate. Sweet. Let's look at this. Is sweet. To become or be sweet or pleasant. Well, that makes sense. Okay, so how do ESV translate? Yeah, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Let's go back to that. Velo yada ki repaim sam be'inke saul keru heha. Sorry. I'm sorry. So we have velechem. Lechem is the word here for bread. It's a great word. Velechem setarim yanam. Right. So setarim. Let's look at that. This is a secret, a covering, a hiding place, secrecy. Okay. Stephanie was directing me towards the study note for. Yeah. So yeah, let's back up here. So we have the way of wisdom. We have in chapter 9, verse 2, she has slaughtered her beast, she has mixed her wine. And then later in chapter 9, verse 5, come eat my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. So wisdom's banquet is far better. This is the note that Stephanie was bringing out 17. Wisdom's banquet is far better than folly's. Folly is offering you water and bread. Wisdom is offering you much more. We might say much more meat, right? Much more not milk, but rather solid food, right? And then on top of it being a much simpler meal, it's also like ill-gotten. It's stolen water, and it's bread that has to be eaten in secret because it's probably stolen as well. And eating things. This is gambling, right? This is the reason why gambling. This is why people love to get. I used to get so was frustrated about it when I was in Arizona. I had people in the congregation, Christian people, who said, well, we go to Las Vegas or we go to Reno or whatever, because it was close, and we set a budget. We set a budget of $200 to go gambling, and when that money's gone, well, then we shut it off. And I want to be like, oh well, we go to Colorado and we set a budget of $200 and we buy all the weed we can with $200, and when that budget's gone, we stop smoking weed. We go to Dry County, and well, it doesn't matter. Like, the idea of just drinking. We're going to spend $200 on alcohol. When that $200 is over, we're going to stop drinking. And it's the stupidest thing, because the reason why gambling is so seductive is because it's something you didn't earn, right? You're winning something that was never yours in the first place. That's why it's seductive. It's theft, it's stealing, it's covetousness, right? I want something that's not mine. I didn't work to earn this. I want to get it for free. I want to get something that I did not earn, that I do not deserve. That's why it's addictive, and that's why it has, that's why people want to do it. That's why there's a desire to do it in the first place. I think that's kind of what's getting at here, is that water that's stolen and bread that's stolen, that we didn't earn, that we didn't actually work for, that we didn't have to ask someone for. In terms of wisdom, wisdom's going to offer it, right? I didn't have to ask wisdom when they just handed it out. These things are great, but very often there's, that whole thing, there's no such thing as a free lunch. The bill comes due, and it's not fun. It's not good for you. The idea of I was just listening to, who was this morning? I was listening to some commentator, and he was saying that we have a culture where we think we indulge our desires and that will actually help us. No. The opposite. The opposite. The less we indulge our desires, the more power we have over them. But the more we indulge them, whether it's pornography or it's alcohol or it's drugs, these things gain a foothold in our life and they take over, right? So the best thing to do, this is why I think abstinence programs, I'm sorry, that's not the right way I mean it, but like AA programs, Al-Anon things, this is why they're so successful in helping people get past them, is because they counsel that the further you get away from them, the longer that you are sober, I wouldn't say the easier it becomes, but perhaps maybe the more tools you have, the better ability you have to resist temptation. In other words, if you have a problem with a substance or a thing, diving headlong into it is not the right call. Rather, it's to step back from it and to fight against it. So this water stolen, the stolen water, this bread eaten secret, it sure is nice. It sure is fun, and it'll be fun for a little while, but it won't be fun for long. And I think verse 18 bears that out, right? Velo yada ki repaim sam beimke seol kerueha, excuse me. Velo, but not yada. Yada is to know something, right? But not, he does know, ki, that, repaim, the dead are there. In the depths of hell are her guests, right? Like, in other words, it's going back to chapter 7, when we were talking about the way of folly, right? It says that exact same thing. Chapter 7, verse 27 of Proverbs. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death. Verse 25, let not your heart turn aside to her ways, do not stray into her paths. For many a victim has she laid low, and all her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death. She offers out this like really enticing thing, but it just leads to death. And I think we can understand that, especially in the idea of like pornography, right? It's held out as this very desirous thing, and it looks good on the outside, but it's filled with broken lives of the people. It's such a there's this show on Netflix that talks about the real life implications for people who have gone into pornography, and they show a lot of people who have come out of pornography and now they're actively counseling against it. they've gone through Christian rebirth. They've come to believe in the Lord, and they'll just talk about how terrible this thing is, what it did to them. It was an empty pit, made them feel terrible about themselves. The more they did it, the worse they felt about themselves. There's just a complete laundry list of people who were in that field, and then they were used up, and then they committed suicide because they couldn't even look at themselves in the mirror anymore. Like this, I think pornography is just the absolute best example to describe this idea that this thing is enticing, but it's filled with death, and it leads to death, and it drags you down to where it is. That's where it'll go, right? It might be harder to alcohol too. Is I think a really the abuse of alcohol can lead to that too. It destroys your life, destroys your body, destroys your physicality, your relationships. I mean, everything. And drugs too. I mean, just all addictive substances fit into this category. So, anyway, we're going to leave off there with what don't fret, right? The way of folly is seductive, and it wants to lead down to Sheol. But you have the Holy Spirit and faith in Christ. So you are not alone. You are not at the whims of folly, and the Holy Spirit will give you strength to choose or to follow, to be in love with wisdom, not folly. Lord's blessings on you the rest of this wonderful day. Looks like we're going to have a nice day of weather out. I hope you get out into the world and enjoy it. Lord's blessings.